And welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 96, I'm joined by Jeannette Stawski. Jeannette is the head of the Association of Outdoor Recreation Education. So this is going to be a conversation around the benefits of not only moving and exercising outdoors, but also collaborating with that sector. And as we're going to touch on in this discussion, certainly there are preferential benefits to moving outdoors, being physically active outside, recreating outside, that you can't exactly get conferred exercising indoors. There certainly is a health equity and access discussion to be had here. Far more people have access to parks than necessarily have access to gyms and fitness centers. So I think Jeannette provides a unique perspective from a different sector that we don't always think about engaging in as a fitness industry. And because of that, I think this is a very important discussion as we start to expand out beyond our four walls and look at how we become more inclusive and more accessible to the population at large. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 96. Please enjoy this conversation with Jeannette Stawski. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Jeannette Stawski. Jeannette, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for being here. Let me be here.
So really excited to have this discussion, largely because we're recording this at the beginning of April. So the magic of television being gone here, we don't record these live. So it's beginning of April. And today is, I feel like, the first day here in the state of Michigan where it's actually beautiful and nice outside. And I can start to think about wanting to exercise more outdoors. And that's a little bit of the conversation we're going to have today. But before we jump into this, why don't you give us a little bit of an idea of your background? We've found that we've crossed paths through multiple different chapters in your life. So beyond just that, tell us about your background and how you kind of got to the point you're at right now.
Sounds great. Well, I'll try to make it short. And yes, I actually was outside just the last hour because it finally is beautiful, and noticing all the runners and walkers going by here. So my name is Jeannette Stawski, and I was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where I am right now, but I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Went off to school originally to play basketball at Boston College, and that turned into rowing, and came back to Michigan where I was a rower on the university's rowing program there. I was a student in the School of Natural Resources and Environment, and that's where I found out about starting to leverage kind of the power of the outdoors in those experiences. I've worked as a rafting guide in Glacier National Park. I've led expeditions around the world, hiking and backpacking. And I now serve as the executive director for the Association of Outdoor Recreation Education, otherwise known as AORE. And in my current role, I help people who are helping other people to get outdoors. So at the end of the day, my whole arena has been trying to help people feel and experience the power of nature through different activities: climbing, hiking, rafting, caving, fly fishing, dog sledding. Kind of that arena is where I work.
Awesome. And I feel like post-pandemic, people have really came to appreciate getting outdoors and being outdoors more. I feel like if the pandemic helped one sector out, it was the parks and the outdoor sector.
Got it.
Tell me a little bit about the Association for Outdoor Recreation and Education. I mean, I think all of us listening can just generally speak and extrapolate what that means, but what do you do? Who do you serve? What are things we should be aware of with your group before we dive a little bit further into this discussion?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And, it's actually funny, when I was thinking about speaking with you today, I often say to people, AORE is what the AMA is to doctors. So I think about AORE as being that organization for outdoor facilitators. So you might work on a college university or on a military garrison. You might run a nonprofit organization that gets people outdoors. You might be a volunteer in your local community. And people come to AORE so they can have access to professional development. They can learn about career advancement opportunities. We do advocacy work, but we're a 501c3, so we don't lobby, but we try to amplify and elevate the issues that are facing members. And then networking. So as you know, borrowing the brilliance of other people is somehow we can be most effective. So AORE's in that work. We have an annual conference. We've got robust member services, but really it's a space for outdoor facilitators to come together, learn new things, see the equipment, learn new strategies, get a pulse on their things, and convey to me what their challenges are so I can bring them to a national conversation.
Yeah, that's great. So you guys are the professional association. I guess as people who are listening to this podcast can think of you as the American College of Sport Medicine, possibly, yes, or URSA, that's the trade association for the fitness industry. You are that for the outdoor recreation space, essentially.
You got it. Yeah. Yep.
So, and I always like to have these discussions outside of our sector, because I think if there's one thing our industry has realized, certainly post-pandemic, but even before, is that not only do we need to understand other sectors in physical activity, we need to collaborate from them, and we need to learn from them, and they can likewise do the same with us. So when you think of the fitness professionals that are listening to this, what's the first thing or the first series of things in your mind you think that they should know about outdoor recreation and kind of how it relates to some of the things that they do?
Yeah. I think that sometimes we make things complicated. And so really what I would invite listeners and your professionals to think about, how do we engage people outdoors? And we don't need to make it complicated. Getting people outside to walk or move, we know that the studies show add value, right? There's the physical fitness aspect, but also the psychological aspects. And I'm sure we'll dive a little deeper into that, but really just welcoming it and not overthinking. Now, of course, I'll put the caveat, be preventative as far as making sure people are warm and dry and safe activities. But I think we need to level set. It's not always climbing Everest or rafting the Grand Canyon. When we think about outdoor pursuits, it's maybe you took that jog around Ann Arbor, you went up, you ran that hill in the Arb or something like that. Getting outdoors is just a way to easily connect people and make physical activity fun. It's fun. It can be social. It can be non-competitive sports, and that can be really engaging for people who just want to participate and move their body in that way.
Yeah, and what I find interesting, I do want to dive into some of the very specific benefits of exercising outdoors, psychologically, maybe even physiologically. But what I do find interesting is that outdoor exercise seems to be and movement seems to be a barrier-free way to get people engaged in movement. My friend Clay from MParks, who's the executive director of the MParks Association, talks about kind of this concept of my big green gym. Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit for a second about that from just a purely a health equity standpoint of why parks are so important for kind of leveling the playing field in terms of opportunities to be active.
Yeah, I think Clay hit it right on the head there. So, I think communities are seeing outdoor fitness or outdoor fitness parks pack a lot of benefit in a small footprint. And again, like at a really affordable price. Part of the appeal is that outdoor fitness is the equipment and it's open for anyone to use, regardless of ability or age or economic status, right? So if there's an outdoor physical area, anyone can help themselves to that space and isn't limited by, again, barriers of price to get access to the gym or required outfits or things like that, which we know can be challenges. You can program in these spaces for both the individual and for the group. So there can be free programming, you're going to do this pull up or this stretch or do something that you've seen, but you could also use those spaces for, team building or group activities. It's also a way, I mentioned before, coming together as a community. And again, I think there's the secret to that is that maybe everyone there is a novice and has kind of that novice mindset, which you don't often get in a gym, right? When you walk into a gym, if you're an experienced athlete or if you're a middle-aged person, it's pretty daunting to see the racks and to see, someone on an assault bike or you name it. They're not bad things, but it does take a certain level of confidence to get up and over. But
Mhm.
if you're going down this trail with someone, you're more like a peer to peer, and you can only go as fast as your slowest hiker, and that's a nice equalizer. It's a more of a celebration of the process rather than the outcome.
Mm. Yeah, that's a very interesting way to look at it. Now, you mentioned what I've kind of heard them referred to as fitness pads. I think that might be the term. I was actually just out at Oakland University this past weekend, and I saw that Priority Health had installed this outdoor fitness pad. This seems to be an emerging trend, just from my eyes, and also from some of the things you said. Talk a little bit about what you've seen in terms of the emergence of these fitness pads. Maybe explain a little bit of what they are first, in case somebody hasn't seen them, and talk about what kind of a role you view them playing in the future in the outdoor rec space.
Yeah, and I'll be completely transparent. It's not 100% all the things that I know in my lane. So I want to, you might find an even better expert who can really talk about some of those benefits. But again, those fitness areas, I think about them as being the pull-up bars or the stations, which help you to perform a squat here or do a lunge or those type of activities. In those spaces, I think again can be drop in or can be used in that way. In my particular lane, when I think about outdoor spaces, I'm thinking about water parks, and I think about, even in Ann Arbor, there's the Cascades. There's a space where people can paddle or canoe and kayak. There's these spaces that we are now recreating with nature, as part of it, and so that's one maybe I'm just a little more comfortable. When I think about hiking or the trails, to get out and kind of saying, what loop do I want to do here? Mountain biking, paddling, but just kind of making them closer to the urban interface, and so people don't have to go so far off to experience those. Is definitely kind of my more lane of comfort.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's the exciting thing, is that there are so many options, and I think a lot of those options, and I'm curious to get your observation as somebody who's in the space. I think a lot of those options, like kayaking and canoeing and things like that, it's activity and it's movement and it's energy expenditure, but it also it tends to be fun as well. So
Mhm.
it doesn't always register that you're out there exercising. Based upon all the experience that you've had, touch on that for a second. Kind of this element of you're active but you don't realize it.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, right? And again, this is your area of expertise. If people are having a good experience, a positive experience, people stick with it, right? That's how we create those habits, is by going back to that. And hey, that wasn't so bad. I tried something new. I want to go back next week. And consistency is the key for lifestyle changes or habit changes. And we want to get there, view through reward rather than punishment. So I think that's kind of what you're speaking to. When you were asking me this question, I was thinking about hiking or walking, right? And I think about, it's just such a natural progression. We have, I think, as a community, made it where sports are so competitive. And again, speaking as a competitive athlete, it's not any, we don't really talk about, did you go to run today? It's what race are you signed up for? And I
Yeah.
think what the outdoors allows us to do is, you can hike the trail and your hikes can get longer and you can add in elevation, but you also can just hike the trail. You can also just, hiking might lead to backpacking. Well, now you're carrying weight and you're going out for extended periods of days. And so you're planning your food and you're thinking about your nutrition. That could lead to a longer expedition. And so I think again, it doesn't have to scale up by any means, but there is an opportunity. And I think about hiking, I think about fishing as kind of a gateway activity to get into these lifelong positive engagements, which again I think is really unique. I think you can think positively about that in those adventures, different than when you're on a treadmill or in an internal space.
Yeah, and there's just a completely different connotation with being in the park than there is being, in the gym working out. It feels, at least, for me, and I'm a gym rat. I'm somebody who loves being in the gym. For me, there's an element of play that exists when you're outdoors that just makes it a little less formal and a little less serious,
Yeah.
which, again, not that serious exercise isn't important, because it is at certain times, but I think for the people that maybe aren't interested in going down that serious path, this is a great low barrier way to start to engage.
Yeah. And I also would add, I think when someone has that experience, and I'm literally thinking of an example here to share with you. I had an opportunity, was invited to climb Mount Rainier, right? So to do a mountaineering summit. Well, how am I going to train for that in Michigan.
Yeah.
Well, you start doing the hikes and then you start walking the stadium, right? And now you're walking the stadium with a backpack on with weight. And I think that allows someone, to really think about, gosh, I was a little uncomfortable on this experience. And so I need to make my hikes a little longer, or I want to do this trail run with my girlfriend group, but I had to walk a lot last time. And so I think there's that level of being comfortable in sometimes an uncomfortable environment that just bodes a lot of confidence, because it's not a number on that treadmill. And again, I spend a lot of time in gyms as well, so I speaking to that as well. But it's different. It's different when thinking, I'm doing this jog up a hill and I can only make it halfway to that tree, and the next time it's the tree after that, and then a couple months later you can run the whole thing, and then there's like, look what I just did. There's such a satisfaction in that. I think any athlete, and I mean anyone can be an athlete, can have that excitement.
Yeah, one of the things you said earlier, which I think is really important, is there does kind of tend to be this just non-competitive nature about getting out there and doing certain things, or maybe the whatever competitiveness exists kind of exists between you and yourself. Like you said, like I'm going to get to that tree, and then next time I want to get to that tree, which is very different, I think, sometimes than gym culture, which in some cases by its engineering, I think of the fitness centers that display heart rate of all the participants in a class, like up on a board. Again, not that that's a bad thing, but that's inherently a fairly competitive way to look at exercise, whereas outdoors is definitely the bar for competitiveness, if structured right, is much lower.
Yeah. I think you're right. And again, it's a choose your own adventure, literally. And there's fitness is part of it. And I think that's that healthy, or this, when you think about this paradox and the work you're doing here, is allowing ourselves to see it, and I was thinking about and preparing for this call, I think about sometimes we just need to remove the ego, and just because it's simple doesn't mean it's simplistic. And so getting outdoors and recreating, being physically fit and active outdoors is a way to just lifelong fitness pursuits that you can try: swimming, biking, hiking, climbing. These are all activities that can be fun, new things. Skate skiing, cross country skiing, downhill skiing. There's lots of ways to be active in fun ways.
Yeah, and I want to start to drill down a little bit more now on specifically some of the unique benefits of outdoor exercise and recreation. And I'm not looking to turn this into a physiology lesson on the sun and photosynthesis or anything else, but I am curious, from somebody who is in this space all the time, I think you would be able to provide a unique perspective. So educate our audience a little bit, teach for a second on the unique benefits of outdoor recreation.
Yeah. Well, again, I hate to pass it through, but I know that we are starting to cite studies, so I will speak to that. I know the outdoor industry as a whole is looking to this, and actually today there was a post I saw that I grabbed, and it was referring to a 2015 Stanford study, and they're finding 90 minutes outdoors, away from an urban environment, helps to alleviate depression, lowers stress, lowers anxiety. Reduces the rumination on negative thought and negative thought feedbacks in that negative feedback loop. So just even thinking about that mental or kind of not the physical aspects in that way, which again, you could speak to, endurance, balance, using your bodies on different terrain. There's that work that can be studied also. And I think there have been some studies, but that is something that we've been challenged by in our industry to quantify, because we know it's intrinsic that it's good, but we're kind of young in that space to really correlate those benefits that I think we are looking towards. So there's some studies and some work to be done, but again, those are the ones that we've been highlighting the last couple of years.
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you a little something about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, addressing the wellness paradox is a lifelong passion project for me. And when you're going to go on a long journey, it's difficult to go it alone. You need to find like-minded individuals that are willing to go on that crusade with you. And that's exactly what I found at the MRF Institute. The team over at the MRF Institute creates educational content for fitness and wellness professionals who are serious about becoming a part of our healthcare continuum. Getting on the healthcare continuum is all about leveling up our skills to be looked at as that valued resource provider. The wellness paradox is certainly an avenue for you to do that, but we need many different levers to pull if we're going to get there. And the MRF Institute is definitely one of those levers. You can go to their website, mrfinstitute.org, to find all kinds of great, informative, free informational content. And if you choose to engage with any of their paid content, they've created a coupon code specifically for Wellness Paradox listeners. You can enter in WP 2022, that's WP, and then the number 2022 to the website at checkout to receive a 15% discount on your purchase. I highly recommend you go check out mrfinstitute.org. Now back to today's episode. Well, I think that's so important, and I'll make sure I reference this in our show notes page. I mentioned this to you before we came on the air. We had Melissa Sunderman, who's a lifestyle medicine physician that's at Canyon Ranch now, in fact, and she, her specific area of interest is outdoor movement and outdoor exercise, and Melissa's far more qualified probably than both of us combined to speak on those medical benefits, but it does seem to confer unique benefits to mental health, even more so than physical health. And given the mental health crisis that our nation is in right now, I feel like we need low cost, low barrier ways to improve mental health. And it seems like the evidence, not just the study you cited, but I've seen several studies, are pointing in this direction, that there is a preferential benefit from a mental health perspective to exercising outside.
Certainly, I will add, and I'm excited to understand more about her work as well. But I think the physical benefits are there. We just haven't tracked them all, and again, I think as this industry continues to mature, that might be the best word. I also think about the scale. When you lead an expedition or go out, there's generally a low ratio. Maybe 2 instructors to 8 to 10 guides, depending on where you're going. So I don't think we've quantified those metrics. As far as tracking the markers that I think that your membership and your listeners would quickly identify. But I think that work could easily be done. It will just probably take some time and money, to do that. But at the same time, I can share that we are starting to shift that way and thinking about what is the role of insurance and how could that maybe provide in health and fitness to do preventative medicine through these activities. So I know that's something that I've had some conversations with other thought leaders. We just haven't kind of unwrapped that all the way.
Yeah, well, don't feel bad about not being affiliated with our industry yet, because the commercial health and fitness space, we're not a mature industry yet. There's a lot of things that we know inherently are true that I think universally people will agree on, yet we don't yet have the robust data sets to be able to support it. So, but we do need to be funding these kinds of things, because again, socioeconomic status, social determinants of health, all of these things are reality. And, everyone seems to, and I've said this many times, everyone seems to agree, at least on the political level, that it's probably good to take a walk in the park. Like walking in the park seems to be a fairly bipartisan issue. So I'm hopeful that if we are going to get change in, any kind of element of, health and healthcare, outdoor recreation seems like it would be a pretty non-controversial lever to be able to pull. With that said, can you talk for a second, at least on a level that our audience would want to engage with it, some of the work you're doing around that? I mean, I know as a trade association, you are trying to, move the needle, even if you're not lobbying, but what are some of the initiatives that you're working on right now you think our audience would be excited to hear about?
Yeah, well, actually, I just returned from an event last week where I was out west talking with other, again, leaders about this outdoor economy and the workforce going towards it. And I bring that up because we are growing so fast, and we recognize that connecting with youth, especially, you've seen maybe every 4th grader in the park, in Oregon, there's outdoor school for kids, like some immersive time experiences there is critical. We know that young people need to be exposed to natural environments in that way at an early age to develop that connection to outdoor spaces, which will allow them to want to recreate in the future, right? So again, as we become more urban centric, we just have identified in the outdoor space how do we make sure to invite those young people to have positive experiences and make sure that's equitable access for all as well? So I think that's one of our big conversations, is not necessarily even the hook, but just recognizing it might not be as natural anywhere for families to go camping or to think about recreating as a vacation or experience, or going as a hike as a family. You mentioned earlier in the conversation, Michael, the power of the pandemic, and that has really done wonders for the outdoor space. I don't know about you, but all of a sudden everyone's getting outdoors. I know that I found more parks in Ann Arbor than I had ever recognized were there. We actually, my family made a little list and we were kind of going through them. And so there's been a sense of wonder of what outdoor experiences we have easily accessible. And I think that, again, is just been another way to really encourage people to get outside and connect with those spaces to then have those positive benefits that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that access piece is so important because, yes, we're here in a little bit of a bubble in Ann Arbor. I mean, for those of you that are listening to this that aren't in Michigan, I mean, we have listeners from around the country and internationally as well. Ann Arbor's an amazing bubble here in Michigan that is just a very healthy, wellness-oriented community. And so oftentimes I try to remind people that not everyone has the kind of access to parks that we have here in Ann Arbor or affluent communities have. I have to imagine that is a constant battle that you are looking to fight as a group, is that, hey, all neighborhoods need access to these green spaces, especially the ones that are least likely to have access to a gym or a indoor place to recreate or move.
You're exactly right. When we think about things like public transportation and how they even get close to wild spaces, we think about sometimes the equipment or the perception, the marketing and branding that you have to have all of this in order to go out, which is completely not the case. But those are some things that we have been talking about, how to demystify that. So you're spot on. Those are some of the issues and conversations that our association is becoming more aware of. And to be honest, that we're all on this learning journey. I think there's a lot of leaders, myself included, that just didn't recognize how unavailable these opportunities were for people. And so it's kind of trying to unlearn that and then address some of those barriers in a way that is the right conversation to have, and making sure that we are being intentional and asking ourselves who's not having this conversation, who's not part of the discussion, so we can understand and make sure that they have those positive experiences how they want to have them, not assimilating to how we've portrayed that outdoor pursuits need to be had.
Yeah. Well said. And, I think we've established, certainly the benefit and the need for, outdoor recreation and for that to, proliferate as much as possible. Now let's, talk to our audience a little more of how fitness professionals, can consider engaging, with the outdoor recreation space, have it be, collaboration through partnerships, directly through, working in these environments. In your industry, it's like every industry right now, sounds like it's having some labor challenges. So, how do you view it from your position in terms of how, people with fitness and exercise backgrounds, academically speaking, can engage with the things that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, again, I think my first answer that pops to mind is just thinking not to make it complicated, right? So I think that just removing that barrier that you need to become, all of a sudden you're a fitness professional, now you need to become an outdoor guide. That's not the case. But what are the ways that you can engage yourself in learning, some reading on opportunities in your space? How could you add that into your client's work or your coaching work? Maybe even with your gym, how could you take advantage or maybe even do some offsite programming? I think I have heard of a colleague who, again, is in town, but has talked about some of those gyms saying, let's meet up over at this place. Let's go do our endurance activity outdoors now, that sort of thing, which could be easy to replicate, I think, across the nation or even overseas. And again, just asking those questions, what's going on in your community already that you could tap in and, again, borrow that brilliance. I'm all for partnerships and just saying, hey, if you've got people who are motivated and wanting to go outside, and you've got a local group that's doing something fun, how do you kind of expose those two things? So again, it's paddling, it's hiking, it is a short run or a trail run or something like that. Could be a unique way to kind of turn that and open up that space.
I like what you said about not making it complicated, because I think, you put a lot of thought into things and never act because you're trying to complicate it. And I almost go back to, the first thing you said in this discussion is that, moving outdoors decidedly should be a non-complicated pursuit. Make it as easy and make it as fun as possible, and that's going to increase the likelihood that you're actually going to be doing it.
Yeah, you're very much right. It's kind of a novice mindset. I think I've used that word before, but I just think really embracing that in play is fun and healthy, right? And almost as we mature into adults, somehow we've lost the ability to play, and myself included, right? Because we've gone through, we try to do all these other things that we're ticking off or trying to move ourselves forward, but really just fun, moving our whole bodies and ourselves, and really being committed and present, I think is part of those benefits of getting outdoors and just getting it done,
Now, you mentioned, kind of engaging with resources and learning and things like that. For the fitness professionals that are listening to this, if they're interested in finding out more about the work that your group is doing, or just generally speaking, resources in the space, where would be good places to direct them?
Yeah, well, a great and easy spot would be our website, and I'm sure we'll list that there. But AORE.org is just your starting spot. I shared the part of the connection we got through here is with the Medical Fitness Association, and we'll be co-locating our conference with them and Athletic Business in Baltimore this year. And I think that's going to be a space where we can really expand these conversations and maybe have those kind of partnerships in a more intentional way than we've ever done before. So I'm working with people like you and other leaders like Marianne and others to think about what does that look like, so we can maybe be advocates and coaches to help your professionals understand what we do and my professionals understand what you do, and come a little closer together.
Yeah, and the collaboration piece, I think, is so critical. One thing that I have found, and this is, had been my observation of aligning with outdoor recreation, parks and rec departments, there is an implicit trust that people tend to have with parks and rec departments, for the most part, that they don't tend to have with our industry. I mean, for better or for worse, the commercial fitness industry is, and we talk about this often on the podcast, we do a really good job of getting the fitter, but in the process, we haven't necessarily engendered a significant amount of trust from the broader American public. I've always found that aligning with the parks in particular, everyone loves their parks. And so, the ability for you to be able to align with them, I feel like does help develop a different kind of trust. And I think the point there being, we all have different resources that we can bring to bear on things. I mean, I don't have a massive wide open space to allow 250 people to exercise or do a trail run or something like that. But I have professionals that understand exercise and how to coach people and work with people. So, there are these opportunities for collaboration. And I think that's why, I was most excited for this conversation, is because it just kind of opens up the creative flow, so to speak, of how we can think about working together.
I love it. I think you're naming a lot of really great things there, Michael, and really insightful, and maybe when you go to a park, maybe what that sense of trust is built on is that you see people who look like you, right? So I think that the layperson is looking out, you pull into the parking lot, there might be someone enjoying a picnic, there might be people throwing the Frisbee, disc golf, someone jogging by, maybe a young couple with small children. And so I think maybe that's what they see is a wider landscape. And really what they're seeing is that they belong there. And I think that speaks to, I think you use that word trust a fair bit.
Yeah.
It feels like it's a public space that we all own. And in that space, we all get to move how we want to move. And really that's maybe what you're naming, and maybe reminding the listeners, your members or your followers and my membership of that as well, right? How do we make it where everyone can see themselves doing the activity? And I would agree. I think just like you mentioned with the fitness arena, the outdoor arena can do that, and the covers of the magazines and the social media are not middle-aged women, who have had kids. It's usually someone who's ripped and they're wearing something really fancy. And we've got a lot of work to do to kind of help everyone feel welcomed.
Yeah, I love that thought of it. Everyone kind of looks like everyone else. I mean, I think we've all had the experience of walking into a gym or a fitness club sometime, and you even people that are in shape looking around going, man, these people are in way better shape than I am. And there is not that same, I think, level of like judgment and self-consciousness in terms of being outdoors, which I think is it's a really interesting insight and a really interesting angle to look at this from. And I'm hoping that, a conversation like this conversation today, and our audience having a chance to go to the show notes page and check out information about your organization will start to open up those channels of collaboration and communication. And so for those of you that are going to be at AB and the MFA conference in the fall. I know I'll be there, so we'll definitely connect. But make sure that you check out the website on the show notes page. Jeannette, this has been great. I feel like there's probably 15 different sub conversations we can have. So, I reserve the right to maybe have you back on the podcast one day.
Looking forward to it. Looking forward to it.
But before I let you go, and this is one of my favorite questions to ask people that aren't in our space, because they sometimes provide the most insightful perspective. This is the question I always end the podcast on, which is that I consider the wellness paradox, the gap that exists between fitness professionals and the medical community. From your perspective, as someone that sits outside of both of those spaces, what's a piece of advice you can give to fitness professionals to close off that gap?
Oh, it's just such a good question, and so give me 1 second here and get my thoughts together. I think I might have even said it earlier, and so I'll just reuse my own thing. 2 things. One is remove ego. And I think that comes from all of us, right? So fitness professionals and our identity is so locked up in that. And I think the medical profession is the same. Coming from a medical family and background, I see it. And number 2, don't let simple be considered simplistic. And I just really, when I think about that, I don't mean it in a Puritan sense, but I think about, we're a society of people who have lived and worked and have agriculture, been touching the earth and been outdoors, and then we lost that. And we actually are having to go back to remind ourselves what it's like to be outdoors and be comfortable outdoors. And it's almost hard work to make it simple, because we've removed that tolerance and that grit. And so I just would encourage us all to think about, we might not have all the analytics, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. We don't necessarily need we need the studies. I don't want to misquote that, but we don't need to overthink it. I think we just need to move people. We need to be healthier as a society, and this is one strategy to do it. There's no one right way.
Awesome. Well said. Jeannette Stawski, thank you so much for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jeannette as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares make a big difference for us. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 96. Please be on the lookout for our next episode when it drops in 2 weeks. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again next, please be well.